Hello everyone, let's continue to look at the Certified Kubernetes Administrator question bank. Next we're on question 4. Question 4 is about storage, specifically our storage class. The main focus of this question is actually about storage. First of all, it's about our basic creation of a storage class. There are also requirements for the name. This includes the binding of our storage volumes, configuring the storage class as the default, and not modifying existing deployments and PVCs. So existing deployments and PVCs cannot be changed. Please pay attention to this. If you modify an existing deployment or PVC when answering this question, you will lose points. But it won't be a complete zero. You won't get a 0 score, but you will definitely lose points. So what should everyone do? You must follow the solution provided in our question bank. Absolutely do not modify the deployment or PVC. You need to ensure the integrity of the original resources. What we're doing is essentially adding a new storage class. Alright, next let's take a closer look at the steps for this question. First of all, what do we need to make sure of? You need to make sure that after finishing the previous question, you've checked that everything is fine and then exit. After exiting, the next step is to start executing the commands. I've already entered here, and after coming in, we use this VM to directly edit our storage class. Here, of course, this file, when we create resources, the question requires that every name must match exactly. But in the exam questions, actually, there are basically no requirements regarding the file names. This is actually different from Red Hat, where the YML files have specific naming requirements. That's because the Ansible content in Red Hat and our CKA content both use YML syntax. On the Red Hat certification side, there are requirements for the file names. You must get the names exactly right. But here, there aren't any. So what do we need here? As long as the result is correct, that's all that matters. As for the process, you can decide for yourself. Usually, you can just use an abbreviation of the question as the file name. That way, it'll be easier for you to check your work later, right? All right, so here, let's start by editing our new file. Let's edit our new file. After entering the file, we just need to add the following content. The main thing is to add the relevant configuration for our storage class. First, the content we need to add is about, first, the version, right? As usual, we start with a version. Storage class is, as you may already be aware, just to clarify, 2 points. IO, that's our first version, and then the type is set to storage class. This is one of those rare cases where both letters are capitalized. Of course, generally, for the type here, many of them have both the first letter and the following letters capitalized. Earlier, when I mentioned cases where the first letter is lowercase and the following letters are uppercase, what was I mainly referring to? I was referring to things like API version and some specific options where many of them start with a lowercase letter, and if there are additional words, those might be capitalized. Of course, this isn't completely accurate. It's just a general rule of thumb, just a common pattern. You don't need to memorize it, just be aware of it. Next, let's talk about our source data. As we mentioned earlier, the main thing in the source data here is actually the name, right? Namespace. At most, you might add a comment. Here, for our storage class, actually there's nothing you need to specify. We don't need to specify the cough namespace. What can we do instead? Just write the name directly and add a comment if needed. So here, first of all, let's specify our name. Let's specify the name. First, saving a name is essential. Every resource must have a name, right? What the question is actually asking for is just this. It just requires us to provide the name. Then here, let's write. Okay. After defining the name, the next thing is our comment. What is the main content in the comments about? In these comments, the additional content we provide is about the following. We are marking the storage class as the default for our cluster. The storage class is what the question requires, making the storage class. We create a default for the cluster. as the default storage class for the entire cluster. It provides default storage. The explanation here is a bit long, so please pay attention to that. Also, pay attention to the spelling of your words. Make sure there are no issues with uppercase or lowercase letters, or any mistakes with symbols. As long as you don't make those errors, it should be fine. Of course, even if you do make a mistake, it's not a big deal. Generally, if you get some of the more critical options wrong, it will throw an error. If you write something incorrectly and it doesn't throw an error, it's just a parameter error. But if it does throw an error, for example, with something like name, then you need to pay attention, right? This part here belongs to what? It belongs to our parameters. If you write the parameters incorrectly, or they don't match the requirements of the question, it won't throw an error, because we're creating something here, creating something new, right? When you're creating something new, as long as the name isn't duplicated, it's not considered wrong no matter what you do. But for things like the ones mentioned earlier. As for what's after the colon, of course, API, version, and kind are exceptions. These must match the versions and types that already exist in the cluster. For things like the name, these are actually variable parameters that can change. But here, everything before the colon is fixed. It's set in stone. If you make a mistake before the colon, it will throw an error telling you where the problem is, or that something can't be recognized. Usually, this happens if you misspell a word or use the wrong symbol, which causes it to not recognize what you've written. So what do you absolutely need to ensure before the colon? You must make sure it is correct. Of course, the good thing is that if you make a mistake before the colon, the error message is usually pretty clear. The real problem is if you make a mistake with these variable parts, then there's really nothing you can do. If you make a mistake here and you can't spot it yourself, even when you run the command, it won't throw an error because it's just a name, and names themselves won't cause errors. Alright, next up, we need to specify something. Our reagent this needs to match the requirements of the question. It must be consistent. Here, what we have is this. What about the prep machine? Yes. It's already available, so you absolutely cannot get the name wrong. If you make a mistake here, you won't be able to find the required reagent mentioned in the question. So first, let's write down the name of the reagent. Here, please pay attention. For some parts, for a small portion of the resources, you don't have to write them out, since there is detailed information available, so it's okay not to include them. Of course, most of them still need to be written, but for example, this one actually can be omitted. Here, let's write down the name of the reagent. As for naming it ourselves, here we just use the name given in the question. Next, we have the following part. It's about binding the data volume, the binding mode for the data volume. Here, we need to specify the binding mode. So the glass mode is according to the requirements stated in the question. It says, so just write it as instructed. We're supposed to use the wait for first mode for this, so make sure to follow the mode specified in the question. All right. After we've set the mode according to the requirements in the question, what can we do next? Well, we can save it. Here, we can just save it. As you can see, this isn't very long, right? The command isn't that long either. But what I mean by not very long is that when you look at it vertically, it doesn't seem long. But if you look at it horizontally, it's actually a bit long, right? Because each of these names is indeed quite lengthy. Also, pay attention to this part here. This name. Yeah, one name, 12, not names, but modes, right? One name, one mode. And here is another name. So what are these items? They are all requirements specified in our question, all content that the question asks for. You can't make any mistakes here. If you get any of these wrong, what will happen? It will affect your answer to this question. Right? Things like your approach and so on. If it's not a fundamental mistake, then not all the points will necessarily be deducted. It might just be a partial deduction. If it's something quite important, for example, if you get the main resource name wrong and it can't find the resource, then that's definitely not acceptable. But if it's a detail, like a specific option, and you get it wrong, then maybe only part of the points will be deducted if you got the overall option right, but made a mistake on some parts. That's how it works. So here, let's use a command to execute the file we just created. Let's check if the syntax is correct. It's correct. Even though it's quite long, we got the syntax right this time. But is the actual content correct? We also need to check that, right? You can't just say you've created it and that's it. Now we've created it successfully and the overall file syntax is fine. But what else do you need to make sure of? You also need to ensure that the content you've created is completely correct. So how do we check that? Well, we do it like this. So take a look. Let's check our storage class. It's because my font is quite large, so it doesn't look very nice. If you reduce the font size a bit, it looks a little better. So we just need to check the name. Just look at the name here. Here, pay attention to this name and check whether it matches the one in the question. And also, pay attention here. You need to make sure that ours is set as the default, because the question specifically requires us to make the one we created storage class as the class that's default storage class. So make sure the default here is set and the name is correct. Then there won't be any issues with this question. All right, that's it for this part. This is the fourth part about creating our default storage class. The main thing to pay attention to in this question is still these names. Honestly, the names in this question are quite long here. They're pretty long. The overall command isn't very long, really. The command itself isn't particularly lengthy. It's just that the names are a bit long. So when you're working on this, make sure all these names are correct. Just double check that the names are all accurate. All right, that's our content here. This is the main point about the text. When you're checking, just pay special attention to this. First of all, first you need to make sure your formatting is correct, because actually this file is relatively simple. For this question, we can see here that what we're mainly doing is specifying, well, just this one parameter, which determines what? It determines our default value, the one we just mentioned. And then what about the mode over here? When you click check, right, where will it show up? It will display here. Actually, you can see that for this question, the main thing for the final verification is that we can see the entire command here. For example, the name, right? The default value. And then what else is specified? In the question, it also specifies another thing. A basic one. At that time, a basic preparer was specified, right? But in this question, we also specified a basic one. This preparer is taken out here, right? At this spot, pay attention to the preparer here. Actually, as long as it shows up here, there's no problem. Why? Because this preparer already exists, and it's displayed here, which means your naming is definitely correct. Yes, it's definitely correct. Next, as for the mode here, if the mode is displayed, what does that mean? It means you've definitely written it correctly as well. If you wrote it wrong, it wouldn't be able to display here, it just wouldn't show up. That's our first point. This is the content of question 4. Actually, with just this command, you can get all of the information from that file we just mentioned. Look here, this part, right? It's written here by default, and the preprocessor is here. And then the mode is here. See, everything's here. It's all complete. Of course, this API version and kind section is just the most basic type and version and kind. There's really nothing special about this part, right? The question is right here, isn't it? It's the default type storage class. Okay, so this brings us to our fourth question. Relatively speaking, there are fewer commands involved in this fourth question. It's true that you encounter it less often. But don't get complacent just because you don't see this type of question as frequently. You must carefully check every single question. After you finish, make sure to check everything thoroughly and only move on once you're sure there are no problems. Once you finish this question, just use exit to quit and you're done. All right, that's our fourth question. If you need the complete question bank, you can leave a comment below and purchase the most reliable question bank at the best price. That's all for today. Goodbye, everyone.